Nobody warned the barman.
That's the thing nobody talks about when they tell this story later, standing in someone's kitchen at a party, beer in hand, voice dropping like they're confessing something.
Nobody warned Marcus. Nobody sent a text.
Nobody put a little note on the chalkboard that said heads up, something's about to happen in here that you're going to describe to your grandchildren.
He was just doing his job.
And then, they walked in.
Let me back you up. Bermondsey on a Saturday in October is its own particular kind of animal. Not wild. Not loud. Something more patient than that.
The railway arches run along Druid Street like a spine, brick darkened, dripping from the morning's rain, and, underneath them the breweries open their hatches at noon and, the beer mile just, begins.
You follow your nose. You follow the cue.
You follow whoever seems to know where they're going and, hope they know more than you do.
I'd been on it for about 2 hours by the time any of this happened.
Me and my mate Priya had started at Maltby Street, not even officially part of the mile, but Priya has opinions about warm-up beers and the words you can't rush a session like she's quoting scripture. We'd done a pale ale that tasted like someone had squeezed a grapefruit directly into October, and a porter that sat in the chest like a good long hug, and we were loosened up and easy in the way you only get on a Saturday afternoon when you've got nowhere to be until the next morning.
The street was doing what it does. Puddles on the cobblestones.
People holding small glasses up to the gray sky like they were checking the color against the clouds. A dog, enormous, black, possibly part bear, lying directly in the middle of the foot traffic with the absolute confidence of an animal that has never once been told no. A man in a high-vis vest eating a sausage roll with the focused devotion of someone completing a spiritual practice.
Normal.
Beautiful.
Saturday.
We ducked into one of the smaller arches, a place called something with street in the name, they all have street in the name, and got into the queue, which was long but moving, the way good queues do, with the social contract holding, everyone facing forward, hands in pockets, a quiet collective agreement that patience would be rewarded.
Priya was telling me about her sister's boyfriend. I was half listening.
I had the warm, mild, pleasant feeling of someone who has had exactly the right amount of beer and is about to have slightly more.
Then, the murmur started. Not loud. Not one voice.
The kind of murmur that travels through a crowd like a current travels through water. You don't see it move, you just notice that suddenly, the whole surface has changed. The man in front of us in the queue went very still. The woman behind us said, softly, to her companion, "Wait."
I didn't see them come in. That's the strange part.
1 second the arch was just an arch, low ceiling, cold brick, the sweet ferment smell that gets into your coat and doesn't leave, and then, there was a shift in the air, the way a room shifts when someone very tall enters and the sightlines change, and people started turning.
Not rushing. Not pushing. Just turning. The way you turn when something happens that your body registers before your brain catches up.
And there, just inside the entrance, standing with the slightly compressed look of two people who have recently been in a car and are now recalibrating to the fact of being in a room with 40 strangers, were the Prince and Princess of Wales.
William in a navy gilet over a checked shirt.
The gilet was the detail that broke everyone, I think.
It was so normal.
It was the gilet of a man who mows his own lawn, or at least genuinely believes he could if it came to it.
Blue jeans.
Trainers that were either very ordinary or very expensive in a way designed to look ordinary, the kind of thing you can't tell from a distance, the kind of thing where only the price tag would answer the question. Kate in a dark green wax jacket. Hair down, slightly damp at the ends from the rain. The green jacket was doing something remarkable, it was making her look like she belonged completely in Bermondsey on a wet Saturday, like she'd been walking this exact stretch of arches every October for years, like she'd probably argue about which brewery had the best taproom. They were talking to each other. Just talking. The way two people who've been together long enough talk, the shorthand of it, the slightly abbreviated sentences, the complete indifference to whether the conversation made sense to anyone else. And, then, William looked up. He saw us all looking. And he did the thing, the smile, the particular one, the one that says yes, I know, I'm sorry, I'm also a person, and he lifted one hand in the kind of wave you'd give a neighbor across a garden fence. The arch went absolutely berserk. Marcus told me later, we talked for almost an hour after, once things had calmed down, both of us sitting on the cold stone step outside with the last of our pints, that his first instinct was professional. His first instinct was, customers.
I didn't clock it immediately, he said.
I just saw two people come in, and then I saw the whole room respond, and my brain went, oh, someone famous, and I started sort of preemptively arranging my face. Because you get people in here sometimes, footballers, people off the telly, and the thing you learn is you treat them exactly the same, you're not weird about it.
He paused.
And then I looked properly.
He laughed. Short, still a bit disbelieving, weeks later. It was not a footballer. The crowd had done its thing.
That beautiful, British, crowd thing where everyone wanted to react hugely and also desperately didn't want to be the person who reacted hugely. So it was a sort of contained enormity rippling energy held behind the dam of English social propriety, everyone buzzing, nobody screaming, the whole arch vibrating at a frequency just below the threshold of chaos. Someone near the back, and, I'm sorry, I don't know who, I genuinely didn't see, started clapping.
Not the slow formal kind.
Just the warm, instinctive, you're here and we're happy about it kind. And then, others joined in, it became a proper round of applause, and William looked at Kate with the slightly pained expression of a man who will never fully get used to this, and Kate laughed, a real one, a tipping forward one, and they both made the small, modest, please stop but, also thank you gesture.
People stopped. Impressively fast, actually. The British instinct to not make things weird reasserted itself almost immediately.
Then, William leaned towards Kate and said something.
She listened.
Her eyes went to the bar. Something shifted in her expression, a decision being made, some small conspiracy forming between them.
She said something back. He nodded.
And then, they walked up to the bar together.
This is where Marcus came back into it.
He was behind the bar with a colleague called Dee, short, sharp-eyed, the kind of woman who looks like she can read a room through the back of her head, which later events would confirm she absolutely can, and they both watched the approach. Marcus said. Dee leaned over and said to him, quietly, in a completely flat voice, "They're coming here."
"They're coming to us."
And he said, "Yeah." And she said, "Okay."
That was the whole conversation. Two professionals squaring up. William got to the bar first.
He put both hands on the counter, flat, relaxed, and looked at the taps with the expression of a man doing a genuine, personal evaluation.
This was the moment, Marcus said later, that did something unexpected to him.
Because royalty in photos always has a particular quality, the composed distance of people who exist inside ceremony. But William was looking at the tap handles with the slightly furrowed, slightly pleased look of someone who actually wanted to know what was on.
He asked me, Marcus said, what I'd recommend. Just like that. What would you recommend? And I thought, right, okay, he's being normal at me, I can be normal back.
He pointed him at the Session IPA. Light, aromatic, the one people generally landed on when they weren't sure.
Easy entry point. William considered this. Looked at Kate. What do you think?
Kate had been studying the chalkboard menu with the focused expression of someone who reads wine lists properly rather than just pointing at a price bracket. She said something about the stout, the dark one at the end of the row, and William looked at Marcus and said, simply, "She knows more about this than I do." Dee, at this point, later admitted she fell slightly in love. Kate ordered the stout and, a pail for William, overruling his own choice, apparently, with a calm confidence that suggested this was not the first time she had overruled his choices and would not be the last.
Marcus began to pour.
And then, this is the actual part, the thing that became the story. William watched him for a second and said, "Could I try that?"
Marcus looked up. Try pouring? If that's all right.
It was said with the particular awkwardness of a man who knows his request is unusual and has asked it anyway, which is, in my opinion, one of the more endearing ways to be.
Marcus later described a very fast internal calculation. Was this allowed? Was this a health and safety thing? Was there some protocol for royalty operating bar equipment?
He decided there probably wasn't a protocol because nobody had ever thought to write one. He stepped back from the tap.
William stepped in.
the arch had gone very quiet. 40 people, maybe 45, most of them holding small tasting glasses or half pints, all of them watching the heir to the throne attempt to pour a proper pint of pale ale at a Bermondsey craft brewery on a Saturday in October. He gripped the tap handle. Marcus said, softly, "Angle it." 45 degrees to start. The glass went to 45 degrees. The beer began to flow. Good color. Clean pull. And then, the glass began to level off and the head began to build and there was a murmur, a warm, delighted, completely spontaneous murmur from the whole room. Kate was watching. She had one hand flat on the bar. She was smiling the way you smile when someone you love does something small and competent. The pint settled. Cream head. Good pour. The arch applauded again, and this time William laughed, full and actual, the slightly surprised laugh of a man who didn't know he was about to be proud of himself for pulling a pint. "I'm keeping that," he said to Marcus. "As it should be," Marcus said. Kate picked up the stout Dee had poured while all of this was happening. Dee, characteristically, had simply continued doing her job and took a sip. Her eyes did the thing eyes do when something tastes exactly as it should. Slightly closed. A small tilt of the head. "That," she said to no one in particular, "is really good." It wasn't performed. It wasn't charming. It was just someone telling the truth about a pint of stout. A woman standing 2 people away from me said, in a whisper that was technically a whisper but also completely audible, "She means it." The man next to her nodded very slowly. He meant it too. The security was there. Of course it was. You noticed them eventually, 4 of them, positioned near the entrance and, along the walls, not in uniform, dressed in the careful nondescript way of people who have been trained to look like nobody. Dark jackets. Comfortable shoes. The kind of stillness that isn't natural to most people but becomes second nature when watching for exits is your actual job. They weren't doing anything. They were just present. A perimeter of calm that said, "Nothing will happen here, and we will make sure of that very quietly." The funny thing, and Priya pointed this out, because Priya notices things that other people narrate past, was that the security made the whole thing feel more real, not less. Because if this were some elaborate stunt or a PR event, there'd be cameras, handlers, someone with a clipboard who kept checking their phone. There was none of that. Just the protection officers doing their low-key geometry around the room and 2 people who had apparently decided to spend part of their Saturday in a railway arch in SA1 drinking craft beer. "This is genuinely unplanned," Priya said. She said it like she was solving a theorem. She was right. The way it came out later, pieces of it from Marcus, from Dee, from a journalist who pieced together a timeline that week, was that the visit had originally been to another event nearby. Something official. Something with a program and a schedule and the usual architecture of royal engagements, the handshakes and the speeches and the carefully arranged photographs. And then, it had finished early. Or they had left early. The details were deliberately vague in the way that royal details often are, everything phrased in the passive voice. "It was decided," the visit concluded, as if decisions make themselves. But somehow there were 2 people with an unexpected pocket of free afternoon, and someone nobody ever confirmed who, but I have a theory about Kate and the expression she'd worn looking at that chalkboard had said, "We're already in Bermondsey." And that had been enough. They didn't rush it. That was the thing that kept striking me as I watched from across the room, where Priya and I had found a position along the wall that was close enough to see but not so close as to be intrusive. There was no performance of normality, no strained casualness, no slightly too obvious "oh, we're just regular people" energy. They were just in a taproom on a Saturday. Doing what people do in taprooms on Saturdays. William had his pale ale. He was talking to a man called Graham. I found out his name later. Graham from Deptford, retired, had been doing the Beer Mile since it started, wore a flat cap with the settled authority of a man who has earned his flat cap, and the conversation looked easy. Real. The body language of 2 people who had both been standing at a bar long enough to know how to talk to a stranger about beer without it being weird. Kate had moved to a spot near the end of the bar. She'd got into a conversation with 2 women, late 30s, one in a mustard-colored coat, one with paint on her left hand and a specific shade of burnt orange that suggested she'd come here directly from something creative, and whatever they were talking about had Kate laughing.
Actually laughing. The kind you can't calibrate in advance. I couldn't hear what was being said. I could only see the shape of it. The mustard coat woman said something. Kate tilted her head, listening. Responded. The paint hands woman joined in.
And there was a pause, and then all three of them laughed at the same time, that particular timing when a joke lands exactly right, and the mustard coat woman touched Kate's arm for a second, just a second, the automatic touch of shared laughter, and then she seemed to realize what she'd done and pulled back slightly.
Kate didn't seem to notice, or if she did, she let it pass without ceremony. That easy. That human.
Dee had been watching all of this from behind the bar with the expression of someone filing information away in real time. She came and found me later. I'd sat down on a bench along the wall by then. Priya had gone for another round, and she didn't say anything at first.
She just sat down next to me and looked at the room. You come here often? I asked.
I work here, she said.
Right. Yeah. Obviously.
She was quiet for a moment. Then, she asked me about the brewing.
The process. She wasn't being polite, she actually wanted to know.
She'd read about something, some different fermentation technique, and she wanted to know if we used it.
Dee paused. I ended up explaining our whole production cycle. How long did that take? 20 minutes.
She said it with the slightly dazed quality of someone who has recently had an unexpected experience and is still processing the edges of it.
She asked good questions, Dee said. Like she'd done it before. Like she brews or knows someone who brews, or I don't know. She just knew the right things to ask. I thought about that. The specificity of it.
The fact that genuine curiosity has a texture that's completely different from performed interest, and how most people can feel the difference without being able to name it. She just knew the right things to ask, Dee said again, quieter this time.
About 40 minutes in, a small problem arrived. Not a crisis. Not even close.
But the thing that Bermondsey does on a Saturday is attract people, and word had gotten out the way word always gets out now. Someone posts a photo, someone's contact sees it, someone texts a friend, and the arch was getting crowded in a way that was starting to create pressure around where William and Kate were standing.
Nobody was being aggressive. Nobody was being horrible.
But there's a specific kind of crowd energy that happens when a lot of people all want to be slightly closer to the same thing, and it was building, and one of the protection officers moved to Marcus and said something brief. Marcus, who I am telling you was extraordinary throughout all of this, nodded once, leaned to Dee, and they quietly started redirecting the new arrivals toward the far end of the bar.
No announcement. No fuss.
Just the subtle choreography of someone who understands that a good room is a managed room and that the best management is invisible.
William had clocked it too.
He did that thing people do when they're attuned to their environment, a slight shift, a quick scan of the room, the unconscious calculation. He said something to Graham from Deptford, who nodded and took a small step sideways, and there was a slight redistribution of the space around them that happened through no single decisive action. Priya, who had returned with 2 pints and a packet of crisps she'd produced from somewhere, watched this and said, "They've done this before."
Obviously they've done this before.
No, I mean, he's helped manage it.
The space. He's not just standing there expecting the security to handle it. I looked again. She was right. He'd moved slightly towards the wall. He'd given the room. Not retreating, not making himself smaller, just redistributing, adjusting, making the geometry work. The move of someone who has spent a lifetime learning how to be in public without consuming all the oxygen in it. Kate had noticed too, and she did something that I've thought about quite a bit since. She turned back to the 2 women she'd been talking to, mustard coat, paint hands, and said something that clearly ended the conversation warmly. Warmly, specifically. Not abruptly. She gave them an out without making it feel like one. The paint hands woman said something back and Kate touched her own hand to her chest, briefly, the gesture of someone who means what they're about to say. And then, she went to William. Not rushing. Walking.
Just walking across a taproom to the person she'd come with. She said something close to his ear.
He listened. He said something back.
She reached past him, slightly past him, not around him, the shorthand of two bodies used to being in the same space, and picked up his glass from the bar and handed it to him.
And they stayed. That was the decision.
They looked at the room, they registered the incoming energy, and they stayed.
Not performing defiance. Not making a thing of it.
Just staying because they were having a good afternoon and they weren't ready to stop yet. The crowd, which had been building its own kind of tension, seemed to feel this decision without it being announced.
It settled. It found its equilibrium.
People took out their phones. Yes, there was no world in which people didn't, but they did it with a kind of sheepishness, aware of being in the presence of a moment that deserved more than documentation.
A few put their phones away again. More than you'd expect.
Graham from Deptford came to sit near us about 15 minutes later. He had his flat cap in his hands and was turning it around slowly, the way some people do with cups or glasses when they're thinking.
All right? I said.
All right, he said.
He looked across the room. Talked to him for a bit. Yeah? What about? Graham thought about this. Football, for a bit. Aston Villa. He's got strong opinions. A pause.
And then we talked about his kids. Not the full names and everything.
Just the way they are. You know. What they're like.
He turned the flat cap another revolution.
He said George is obsessed with history. Won't stop asking about things.
Why is this the way it is? Who decided this? What happened before this?
Just relentless. Graham smiled. Small. Private. Sounds like my grandson, he said.
He put the flat cap back on.
Good bloke, he said. Just a good bloke. He got up and walked back to the bar.
The pint William had poured himself, the pale ale, the one Marcus had coached him through, sat on the bar counter after he finished it.
Marcus didn't clear it immediately.
He left it there for a while, the empty glass, cream residue drying on the inside and the lace pattern a good pour leaves. Later that night, after closing, he washed it with everything else. He told me he thought about keeping it and then felt embarrassed about thinking about keeping it and so he washed it. But I looked at it for a second before I did, he said.
He looked at me. Don't write that down. I didn't write it down at the time. But I remembered it.
They left the way people leave when they've had a good time and know when to go.
Not abruptly. Not dramatically.
There was no announcement of departure, no working of the room, no final handshakes timed to a PR beat. One moment they were there, William finishing his second pint, Kate with her hand around a small glass of something amber that had appeared somewhere in the last half hour, and then there was a brief look exchanged between them, the look that has no words because the words have been said so many times over so many years that the look has replaced them entirely.
Ready? Yeah. William said goodbye to Marcus first.
Shook his hand, really shook it, two-handed, the full thing, the kind of handshake that has weight, and said something that Marcus later refused to repeat exactly, only saying it was kind.
Really kind, he said. Not the kind of kind that's polite. The other kind. Kate came to the bar and said something to Dee. Dee nodded.
Whatever it was, she held it close after. She told me she'd pass the message on, that's all she'd say.
Pass it on to who? She smiled. To the right person. And then they went. The protection officers moved. A quiet, practiced folding of the perimeter. The door opened.
The grey Bermondsey afternoon admitted them briefly, two figures stepping from warm light into the damp cool of Druid Street, and then the door closed.
The arch was absolutely silent for exactly 3 seconds. Then, Graham said, right, then, dot. And everyone laughed. The thing about the silence, those 3 seconds, is that nobody planned it.
Nobody orchestrated a respectful pause.
It happened the way the applause had happened when they arrived. The room's instinct got there before anyone's intention. And, what it meant, I think, sitting on my bench with my mostly full pint going warm, is that something real had happened in that arch. Not a spectacle. Not a moment. A real thing. The difference is texture. Spectacles feel smooth. They're designed to feel smooth. Every edge sanded, every awkward corner planned away, the whole thing is surface that light moves across without catching. What had happened in the arch had texture. Graham's flat cap. The paint on the woman's hand. William's slightly uncertain grip on the tap handle. Kate's laugh, the tipping forward one, the unplanned one. Real things snag. They catch the light differently. The room found its footing again in the way that Bermondsey rooms do, with the help of beer and the particular social intelligence of people who have been in taprooms before and understand that the best thing to do after something remarkable is to stand there being people together. Conversations restarted. New arrivals who'd missed it entirely were being told in various versions, each slightly more emphatic than the last, the way good stories get retold. I heard you should have seen 3 times in 5 minutes. I heard no, genuinely, actually here, in this room twice. I heard a woman say to her companion, very quietly, "I'm so glad we came," and her companion reached over and held her hand for a second. Just a second. Priya had gone to find the bathroom, came back, looked at the room, looked at me. They left? Just now. She sat down. Picked up her pint. Held it for a moment without drinking it. "I kind of can't believe we were just here for that," she said. "I know. Like, we weren't going to come in here. I wanted to go to the sour place." "I know." She shook her head, smiling at something private, the inside joke of a life that makes unexpected turns. Marcus started finding himself at the center of a small orbit of people who wanted the close-up version. He handled it with the same quality he'd brought to everything else that afternoon, and unhurried, considered generosity. He told it properly. He didn't rush. He included the details that earned their place, the 45-degree angle. The question about recommendations. The two-handed handshake at the end. He told it like someone who understood that the story was not his, but he was the best person to carry it. I watched him tell it 3 times. Each time, the group that gathered had that quality of people who were listening not just with their ears but with their whole bodies, slightly forward, slightly still, the posture of people who don't want to miss a word. Dee was less forthcoming, which was perfect. Dee being mysterious about it made it better. Made the parts she'd been given feel like they mattered, like they were worth guarding. There's a version of this story that becomes immediately annoying. I want to name it, because I think it's important to distinguish it from what actually happened. The annoying version is the one where 2 famous people condescend to enter a working-class cultural space and perform normality for the benefit of their image, and everyone is grateful, and the photographs are used by someone with a communications job, and the whole thing was orchestrated from the beginning. That version exists. It's a reasonable thing to suspect. We live in an era of performed authenticity, and the machinery for it is sophisticated and largely invisible, and you'd be naive not to at least hold the suspicion as a possibility. But it doesn't fit the evidence. The evidence is no cameras beyond people's phones. No briefing of Marcus or Dee in advance. No prepared remarks or positioning notes. William's genuine uncertainty at the tap. Kate's 20-minute conversation about fermentation techniques that nobody outside the brewing industry would bother to learn enough about to fake convincingly. Graham's flat cap going round and round in his hands while he told me that George sounds like his grandson. The evidence is texture. You can manufacture smoothness. You can't manufacture the specific grain of a real afternoon. Priya and I stayed for another hour. We weren't ready to leave the room yet, even after the room had mostly let go of the event and reassembled itself as a regular Saturday in October. There was still something in the air, not charged, not electric, just warm. Like the residual warmth in a room where a fire has recently burned. We sat and we talked about other things. Her sister's boyfriend, who I still hadn't formed a proper opinion about.
A film I'd seen the week before that had a third act problem. The particular quality of October light in London, which is unlike October light anywhere else, lower than you expect, more gold, hitting things sideways in a way that makes everything look significant even when it isn't.
We didn't talk about what had happened. Not because it wasn't worth talking about. Because some things need a little time before they want to be said. When we finally left, stepping out onto Druid Street, the afternoon had gone. The sky was the particular mauve grey of London at 5 o'clock in October, the last of the light retreating somewhere behind the railway arches, the cobblestones darkened, wet under the fizzing brightness of a streetlight that had just come on. The Beer Mile was winding down around us. People walking in pairs, in groups. The animal of the afternoon getting tired, slower, more comfortable, settling towards evening. A woman was trying to fit her coat back on while holding a paper bag and a small bottle of something she'd bought as a takeaway. She was failing at it, juggling, doing the three things with two hands problem that always looks like a comedy bit from the outside. The man with her watched for 1 second and then reached over and held the bottle while she put her coat on, which she did in 3 practiced movements, and then she took the bottle back and they continued walking. So small. So easy. I watched them go. I thought about a hand on a tap handle, the angle of a glass, the particular expression of someone doing something ordinary for the first time and finding it good. There's something about the Beer Mile on an October Saturday that already makes you feel the particular sweetness of things that don't last. The arches will close. The light will go. The beer will end. Everyone you're walking with will go home to their separate lives and carry this afternoon somewhere in them for a while, and then it will settle into the deep sediment of good days that don't announce themselves, that you have to dig for when you need them. What happened in that arch was of a piece with all of that. Not a royal visit. Not a moment. Just a thing that happened on a Saturday in Bermondsey, in an arch that smelled of malt and wet brick, between people who were all, for an hour, just people. I talked to Marcus one more time before we finally left for good. He was clearing a table, the end-of-day efficiency of someone who knows the routine. I said, "How are you doing?" He thought about it honestly. "I keep thinking about the handshake," he said. Not because of what it was. Just, it was a good handshake. You know? A proper one. Some people shake your hand and you can feel they're doing a thing, doing a version of handshaking. That one was just a handshake. He set down the glasses he was carrying. "I think," he said slowly, "the thing about today is it didn't make me feel small. And sometimes, not often, but sometimes you get near something very big and it makes you feel small. Today didn't do that." He picked up the glasses again. I don't know if that makes sense. It made complete sense. The last streetlight on Druid Street caught the puddles on the cobblestones as we turned towards the tube. Gold on black water. The arches receding behind us, dark now, quiet, sealed up till next Saturday when the whole thing begins again. Priya said, "Next time, the sour place first." "Fine," I said. "I'm serious. You can't just assume we'll get lucky twice." She was right. You never plan for the good days. They find you in the middle of the ordinary ones, when you weren't paying attention, when you were just following whoever seemed to know where they were going and hoping they knew more than you did. And then, something happens in a brick arch under the railway, on a grey Saturday in October, that you'll carry in the warm sediment of yourself for years. A pint poured at 45 degrees. A real laugh. A proper handshake. Enough.